There's a lot of very good, very interesting YouTube videos about world building that will guide you through the basics, where to start, how to build up your own worlds in such a way that makes them feel immersive. Sometimes though, I think it's the little things that make all the difference. Little touches that just shake everything into life, so that's what I want to focus on today here. The little things you can do that may seem really obvious when I say them, but a lot of writers forget and they can make a huge difference. So 8 useful things you might forget when world building. Let's start with the most obvious one and say that people disagree on a lot of things. Even people that can get on, or people that are on the same side in conflicts, there's still a lot of things they disagree about. As such, if you're inventing your own religion or mythology for a world, let's say, you can't just expect everyone to have the exact same beliefs on everything. I'm not saying you have to invent a second religion that a smaller minority follow. I mean, that'd be a good thing, obviously, but I'm saying even people of the same religion will have points of disagreement. Maybe there's a particular god in your mythology that's slightly controversial, that some people worship and others choose not to, or some are even actively against. Maybe there's things in the myths they interpret differently, or morals set down that they disagree over. You know, every individual has slightly different ideas to every other individual, so if you can just find spaces to slip some of those small debates and disagreements in, and give space in the mythology so that they can have disagreements over things, it'll bring your invented religion much more to life. And so by the same token, the same can be done with politics and philosophy and other things in your world. You know, if there's a big evil government, there's got to be some reason people support the big evil government, and you know, it's worth making that a pretty good reason that sparks more interesting debates between characters in the world. Maybe there are people that agree the big evil government isn't the best, but you know, they believe they need a strong leader to carry them through this particularly difficult time period, or maybe they fear that overthrowing it would lead to anarchy much worse, or maybe the big evil government does do some genuinely good things in certain areas. It's just more alive that way, I think, so that when characters talk about the religion or politics or whatever it is, even if it's just small comments that come amidst something else going on, you know, someone else might then be able to throw in a slightly different perspective rather than all saying the exact same thing, because that makes it all seem so much more fleshed out. Suddenly you're not saying this is the politics of the world, you're saying these are the sort of political conflicts people argue over in this world. Again, a very obvious one, but so underutilised in stories. Obviously, your characters need to speak in the language of your audience. Let's say it's English, but why should they speak English exactly as we speak it? You know, like Harry Potter is basically ordinary modern English, except they occasionally say Merlin's beard instead of oh my god or something. There's a scale for how much or little you want to include slang. With something like Harry Potter on that one side, where they have very few slang phrases, maybe a few labels, I guess, for things like muggles and mudbloods. But then on the other extreme is something like A Clockwork Orange, where maybe you're getting dangerously close to so much slang that it gives your readers a headache trying to figure out and remember what everything means. So it's up for you to decide how much or little you want to add in, but you know, why not at least do a bit? Just to make it feel more distinct from ordinary life. You know, hopefully your made up phrases sound a bit better than Merlin's beard. You know, it makes you feel smart when there's a slang word and you know what it means. It makes you feel like you're being let in on something special. Even if it's very small things like Saving Private Ryan, when they keep saying FUBAR. And then you finally discover what it means, if you didn't already know. But that makes you feel like you're being let in on the story, and that's just a very small, one-word, realistic example in a non-fantasy film. So think what you can do in fantasy with world building and lots more invented slang. This one isn't technically world building itself, but it makes a massive difference in terms of how vivid things feel. An immersive world isn't just about how detailed and expansive it is. It's also about how memorable it feels and how much it grabs your attention. Those are the bits you remember when you step away from the book and have it drifting about in the back of your brain. As such, when characters go to different places, make those places visually striking in one way or another. You know, in Lord of the Rings, when they travel to the mines of Moria, it's not just a mine, nor just a bridge, but the bridge of Khazad-dûm. It's visually striking. Minas Tirith, this white city with this memorable, symbolic, mystical feeling white tree that becomes their emblem. You know, those are more epic, gigantic examples, but even in smaller scale, more mundane stories, you can do things to make the locations more memorable. The garden at Hogwarts, for example, there's a willow tree that will move and will attack you. I don't know why, I don't care why, but it's much more striking than if you just had an ordinary garden. And when they travel to the common rooms, they don't just walk across some stairs and open a door, because the staircases move and the doors are protected by living paintings that want a password. These are visually more memorable images in your mind. I mean, those points aren't major, they're just background stuff, but they captivate you much more if you can visualise and remember the locations more vividly. So of course that will make your world overall feel more immersive. Again, obvious but often overlooked. What's considered good or bad luck in your fantasy world? Maybe it's not breaking mirrors and stepping on cracks. Maybe it's spilling your drink, or sleeping on your left side, or not bowing to the door as you enter a room. Little things that make no difference in the grand scheme of the story. They take literally no time to explain, but stuff like that is interesting, and it just pads out the background of the world a bit more. And then customs too. Maybe people pat each other on the shoulder instead of shaking hands. Maybe they knock on doors by gently kicking it with their feet. Maybe on Sundays most people wear red clothing. You know, who knows what it is, just something different and interesting. I've always felt this a lot about fantasy stories. Fantasy has literally no limits. You have total creativity to invent or do absolutely anything you want, so why not be imaginative? Why not have a bit of fun changing small things and playing about with it like a lump of clay? Slightly different customs, slightly different superstitions is one example of that. It's nothing major because you don't want it to get in the way of the plot, but enough just to make the reader feel, yep, this is a different world I'm diving into. This is separate from ordinary life. There's a lot of prejudices in the real world, some of them obviously pretty horrible and lead to discrimination, which you might want in your world. However, keep in mind you'd need to handle that issue properly. Maybe you want small prejudices as well. You know, those sort of odd, ridiculous jokes that nobody believes but continue to knock around for some reason. Like how people say the Welsh shag sheep, or the English are posh, or the Americans are stupid, those sort of strange things. So maybe you want something similar in your world. Maybe there's stereotypes the villagers in one location will make about the people from the next village over, and then what the people from that village will say about those in the first one, or, you know, the people in different kingdoms. You can invent these stupid, weird stereotypes that aren't true, and if your characters ever visited the second village, they'd see it wasn't true, but it's just interesting and adds another layer that makes it feel like the ordinary, minor characters of the world do interact with each other beyond just the plot. You know, they don't just exist for the sake of the plot. This, I think, is probably the most important point. Immersive world building is as much about how you teach the reader your world as it is about the world itself. It's as much about the exposition, how you invite the reader in and help them understand, as much as it is about the information. Because you can churn out pages of exposition and bore the reader to death, or you can find useful, creative ways to slip it in when appropriate so that it doesn't disrupt the plot, but also doesn't leave you wondering what's going on because some bit of world building hasn't been explained, you know. Sometimes you will just need to explain to the reader when appropriate in a sentence or two, that's fine. But sometimes there's also lots of different ways to slip things in more seamlessly, and one of them is exposition through character. So by that I do not mean a line of dialogue where one character over-explains something that another character would already know just for the sake of the audience. I hate that, you know. What I mean is a lot of those background world building elements can be told just through certain characters being themselves. For example, and you're going to have to take these as very simple examples, but maybe instead of explaining the superstitions in your world to the reader, maybe you just have a character who's particularly superstitious. That's part of his personality, and he keeps getting hung up on things being bad luck and not wanting to do stuff because of it, and that becomes his dynamic, and it provides a small amount of humour for the reader, and you get to explain what the superstitions in this world are just by letting that character be his natural superstitious self. Or in the same vein, maybe there's a particularly traditionalist character who likes things to be done according to proper customs. Maybe the main characters have to visit him at a point in the story because they need his advice or something, but he won't speak to them until they bow and greet him in the proper way with proper customs. Those are very simple, straightforward examples, but I think they illustrate the point. There is a lot that can be explained just through characters being their natural selves, if only you take a moment to think about it and think about what these characters could express through their behaviour. I imagine there's probably a proper term for this one, but I don't know what it is, so I'm calling it emotional geography. You know how the Taj Mahal was built as an elaborate tomb for the Emperor's favourite wife? Or not too far from me, there's a castle called Colchester Castle, where the Emperor Claudius built an elaborate temple when he invaded, which was then destroyed and replaced with this uglier castle after the Romans left, and you go and visit it and you kind of wish Claudius's temple was still there instead. That's putting it very simply, but there's a sense of history there that conveys some sort of small emotion for you. Why not do the same with buildings, places, items, whatever in your world? If your evil emperor has a gigantic dark tower, why does he? I mean, obviously it's for practical reasons as well as probably a power statement, but why did he build it exactly where he built it? Or why is it designed the way it is? What does that tell us about that character, Maybe it was built over the grave of someone who once slighted him as a revenge. Maybe his kingdom is, near to the coast and he's paranoid of drowning, so he wanted this tall tower in case of flooding. Again, both of those are stupid examples, but you get the point. Instead of just being a building in itself, it now also tells you something small about one of the characters or one of the functions or something about the world. And more importantly, you can also do places that have come to mean something to the characters. Maybe there's an iconic set of stairs in a castle that a character remembers sitting on when young and it was a place he always used to go for whatever reason. Or there's a place that reminds a character of his parents before they died, or a place where two lovers met, or whatever. Again, very basic examples, but you get the point. Rather than just this location that you describe simply because it's interesting, you're now sort of telling it also with an emotional lens. Now it has some emotional tie to some characters or other people in the world. That makes it feel more real. And I guess it's a similar point to that of exposition through characters, because places do mean things to people in the real world. They're not just stone, they're not just places that exist as material constructions, because we do stamp our own emotional feelings onto them. So if you see some of that same emotional stamp from the characters in your world, it will feel twice as real. That's a very background, subtle, underlying thing, but I'm sure it can make a big difference. Which sort of leads me into my final point. The importance of this one does vary a little bit depending on the scale of the story you're writing. However, I think a sense of community does more to form an immersive world than carefully setting out any nuanced details. I mean, whatever information you have about your world is just information, unless it's brought to life through the story and through the characters. So all the points I've said above, and a load others you could make, they all lead to the importance of building a sense of community in the places of your world. You need it to feel like things happen and characters still all do stuff in the background beyond the scope of your story. So there's shared knowledge and inside jokes of people living in that certain place, where in this village, say, the pub landlord is known for being surly and that you're not supposed to ask him about his son, or that there's a house someone was once brutally murdered in. Everybody believes Mrs. whatever round the corner is a witch. That all the stories Jim the Baker tells are just lies, that the kind old carpenter hasn't been the same since his wife died. Little things the characters know and say and joke about each other in the community. Little different things they all have slightly different opinions on. That's the sort of stuff that really brings it to life. And I'm not to say the details aren't important, because they are, but in my opinion, building this sense of a community is much more crucial than how carefully detailed the history of your fantasy world is. You've got to make it feel like the people in this world know each other and interact, and stuff develops behind the plot. Those are my 8 points anyway. Maybe I'll do a part 2 on this and talk other stuff if there's any interest from you. Videos offering writing advice aren't my main focus on my channel, and when I do talk about writing advice, because I have done, it's normally weaved through with an analysis on a film or something, because film analysis is my focus. But let me know what you think about this kind of video anyway. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you fancy it, comment any thoughts you have, support me on Patreon if you want to do that little bit extra, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time.